Scholar, is there anything you want to talk about? May I tell you a story? When I was 19 and I'd fallen victim to philosophy, both thinking-wise and feeling-wise, about 99.9% of life ceased to make any sense. I ceased to make any sense. Dropped out of school, had no friends, and I held my parents responsible. Yeah. Because you get to a place where you want some answers from life, from people. You first go to the people closest to you, your parents. My siblings were younger than me, so I couldn't go to them, but I could go to my parents. But immigrants, traditional folks, the things that young people go through these days, you couldn't go through and you couldn't express. 50 years ago, it'd be disrespectful. You go to your father and say, "Dad, I don't think I'm feeling well." He'd probably just kick you. He'd probably say, "Nobody feels well. Just, stop complaining. Go out there and live your life." Or not live your life, because you didn't really have much of a life. And so for the longest time, I had this hatred towards my parents for bringing me down here. Without any manuals, like how you open PS5 and you want to know how it works. You go through all these pages. And there's no manual, What do you do when you're 19? What do you do when you feel like you got physical parents, but emotionally they're just not there? What do you do when you can't understand your own emotions, the way you think about things? And so it just becomes this gigantic mess, inwardly and outwardly. You're always like walking around angry. And you would get into relationships, romantic kinds, but something about you would say, it's not going to last, And the other person in your life, you okay, Eva? Am I describing your life? And these other people are attached to you, they like you, they love you, but deep down, you are like everything you touch gets destroyed. And you begin to hurt people. You don't really want to hurt them. You like them, you love them. But you're just so unstable. It's just not dependable in any sort of a way. And so, and that continued until I was about 62. And then the moment I hit 62, clarity. I realized I have no longer any energy to fight. I just gave up. So just in case you're young and you look at the world and you see it as a complete mess, it's nice to be young because, you wrestle with all the forces to make the wrongs right. Some of it you can, most of it you can't. And little by little, you kind of realize where you have power and you exercise that, where you're powerless, you try not to walk that particular path. And then you get to be 50 or 60, you look back and you say, man, so many turns and twists in life. So, I'm sorry, you were saying you had a question.
Oh no, I was going to say.
Yeah. Eva.
Like
You know, there is this story about a caterpillar. I think they have like 1,000 legs, or a centipede. I'm sorry? It's a pet? You like have a leash around his neck, walk around the lake? so, so you know, the centipede is an interesting little worm. He just walks around. I mean, I have difficulty managing, 2 legs. When you have like 1,000 legs, it's an amazing thing. And so one day, Sarah here is walking through a class and runs into a centipede and looks at the centipede and wonders and says, wow, you got all these legs and yet you never trip, you never fall, you never slip. How do you manage? And the centipede doesn't really like white people. And so dismisses Sarah completely. Says, what a stupid question, and then walks away, and after 5 minutes or a 5-second period, says to himself, I mean, Jesus Christ, look at all these legs. That wasn't a stupid or a silly question. It's a good question. How do I not slip or trip over myself? 100 legs. And they work together so harmoniously. And so he goes on this quest to figure things out. How do I not trip over myself? I want to study each single leg to see how it moves. And then comes the moment of reflection. Sits back and observes. And then begins to ask lots of questions. Hello, Mirna. And then can no longer move forward. Stand still. He begins to doubt, he begins to question. He's in this world of awe and mystery, and he can't get himself out. His instinctual ability to walk around disappears. Something happened to us, and I think it happened, I think people like Socrates, people like Jesus Christ, people like Moses, Malcolm X, Martin Luther, they're great people, don't get me wrong. But they invite reflection. You love your boyfriend, and you've never questioned as to what love is, and why you love him, and why you want to stay with him, and why you want to marry him. Those questions just don't exist. And then you take some stupid class, or you read a stupid book, or you watch a stupid YouTube clip, and whoever the speaker or the author or the instructor is, they're very animated, they're very exciting, and you listen to them. And it's like what you're reading or what you're watching just goes inside you and it stays inside you. And you try to push it out, but it won't leave. And then you walk home looking forward to seeing your boyfriend or whatever, and you say, why am I going home? Do I really have a home? Or was man born to be estranged, the homeless? And all the ways we try to create homes for ourselves are just like illusions, deceptions, fantasies. We are never made, to feel as if we have a home. Everything is temporary. Love. What is love? Do I love him for his body? Do I love him for his mind? Do I love him for a history? Do I love him for his soul? And all the ways that people have lived for many, many thousands or millions of years, for you, they just disappear. Why? You're beginning to think, Individuality did not exist for the longest time in our history. But now, your life is yours. Do with it what you will. Capitalism didn't exist. Free market didn't exist the way it does now. Power, privilege didn't exist. I mean, we really did have so few options in life. There is only one thing to believe in and have faith in. That's God. That's it. Eva, that's it. You get rid of that, you begin to worship Kim Kardashian, you know. And so you realize you're under an avalanche of options, your expectations of yourself, how and what other people, you know, want from you and demand from you. You're like way up there. And everybody, yourself included, assume that you can be the next Cristiano Ronaldo or Taylor Swift or Kim Kardashian or Karl Marx. And you just kind of walk into this territory where you have zero talent, you're lazy, you're not gifted, you're talentless, and yet you imagine yourself to be great. And then add to it the fact that from the moment you wake up to the time you go to sleep, all these forces out there are trying to grab a space that lives inside you, to occupy it. Pepsi Cola, Coca-Cola, Sprite, boyfriend, girlfriend. Am I straight? Am I gay? Am I trans? Am I this? Am I that? And you go home after, 4 or 5 days of being out, and you say, I have no idea who I am, what I ought to do with the short few hours that I'm down here. And so you suffer a mental breakdown, I mean, the truth is, first, it's tough being a human being. Second, it's tough all of a sudden as a young woman turning to be like 12. Hormonally, you're changing. Everything about your body is beginning to change. That impacts your emotions, your biology, And then peer pressure sets in where you want to conform, belong. You want to create a cult or belong to a cult. And then taking classes that you don't really care for. Then being in a social environment that's punishing. Then you get to a place where you want to fall in love, create stability. I mean, that's just a lot of things you got to do in the next 60 years of your life. Divorce rate, almost 70%. Depression, almost 70%. I mean, it's like a disease. How do you survive it? Kendra, it's good to see you. Thank you for your gift. Have a great class. I wish, forgive me, Jesse. I don't know if I've told you my story with my father. I call him every day before coming to class, and he says to me, Amir, you're working with young people, hopeful young people with lots of, stamina and capacity. Go on there and inspire them. And then he hears my voice and he says, don't be such a downer. Go on there and inspire them. I said, well, Dad, you came here when you were 50. Life for you guys were difficult. Temperamentally, you're just positive. I can't be like you. He says, yes, you can. Go on there and inspire them. And I really try. I come to class and I try to be a beacon of hope. But man, unless you get a lot of power in life, if you're very, very attractive, you're not going to suffer too much from being lonely because men or women will just follow you. If on the other hand, you're mediocre looking, or if you have a man who is in the grips of lust, and lust basically means that there's a component inside you that becomes attracted to things that are beautiful. Hello, how are you? Good, thank you. And so, yeah. So my recommendation, Skylar, is, if you're feeling confused and hopeless, it means you have no power in life. If you can summon up the stamina to stay in school for another 4 years and not give up and be okay with just being alone, just distract yourself as often as you possibly can, but survive it. stay in school. If your parents are rich, steal some money, go traveling, I don't know. But if your parents are not rich, stay in school, get your bachelor's, hopefully a master's, but then you'll be like 25, 26. Some of the emotions that are creating this tornado inside you, by then will kind of dim a little. And then you will go to interviews to get yourself a job, then you'll be given cubicles, a tiny little cell you have to live in about 8-9 hours a day. Just moments of respite will come to you. دائما یکسان نباشد دور گردون غم مخور. That things are not going to stay the same. Things will change. But until then, you gotta suffer, man. Good luck. Jesse?
You said that, how can any of us survive or withstand living in this modern culture? And do you think trying to tap into that, there's that side of us that is prey to modern culture and making everything so complex and overthinking, but there's also people who can tap into that creative side and sort of that's sort of the antidote to all of this.
Yeah.
Right?
If you have that creative genius inside you and you're able to tap into it by sheer willpower, yeah. I mean, look, if you're a writer and you realize that your house is just noisy all the time, but there is a bedroom or a study way in the back, and everybody in your home knows that no one can occupy that space only belongs to you, then yes, that gives you a tremendous amount of power, where you can leave the noisiness of life, go sit in that room and just write away for the next 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 hours. As a woman who wrote Harry Potter, that's what she did. She's got a dozen kids. She's got 5 or 6 husbands. Her life is quite busy, but she's well off. She goes to New York, rents a nice room in a beautiful hotel, her bed is fixed. They do laundry for her, breakfast, lunch, and dinner are served, and she sits there and writes and writes and writes and writes for hours. If that privilege has been given to you, then yeah. If on the other hand, you don't have that power, but you have a brother or a sister or a friend who does have that power, then all that you have is envy. And that's not bad. You could go to your friend and beg him if you could rent that tiny little space for 5, 6 hours so you can sit and write. If you're a poet, if you're a painter, if you like to create music, if you like to go on hikes. I mean, I don't really know. I suppose, going back to Jesse's comment, if there is anything you can do that can provide some shade where you can rest from the scorching, hot, then yeah, fine, good. I just don't know if many of us have that particular privilege. And I don't want to talk to you as a 63-year-old man who's gone through all that stuff, and now I sit in my home and table talk is stupid, and armchair philosophy of life is stupid as well. So it's good not to forget your past. The truth is, being young is difficult. It's just being young in this culture, this period in time, it's really, really tough. When I was growing up, you had the support of your entire culture. I kid you not. I misbehaved in a store, the clerk would come out and slap me. I would go home and my mom would say, "Why is your face red?" "Well, I said this nasty thing to the clerk," and she would slap me. Then my dad would come home. "Why is your face red?" "Well, I said some nasty things to the shop owner, then I said some nasty thing to my mom," and then your dad slaps you. And all of a sudden, period of 5 minutes, 3 slaps. And you realize that the culture and family life, they all work in unison. Not always in a good way, but now you're just, left to your own devices. And it's tough to be 19, to lack resources, and to be forced to wrestle with the complexities of life, So Yes, Leah. What? I don't understand. I have known you for like 11 years. Every day of those 11 years, there has been a question. That's like a surprise that my heart can't take. I'm just kidding. Yeah, Zamir.
I just wanted to know, when you said you were angry at your parents for not giving you the manuals, what do you mean by that?
So, you don't have any money. Your parents are poor. They don't have any money. You go in the streets and your friends have bikes. And you want a bike. You don't want to be the only kid in the neighborhood who doesn't have a bike. And your friends are riding the bicycle and you're running after them. So you whine, you cry, you scream at your parents about poverty. You know, if you've seen that movie Fiddler on the Roof, where the old man sings the song and he says to Yahweh, you know, what would have happened if you've just given me like a bit of money? Would that really hurt you that much? You know, he's complaining to Yahweh, right? And so your father, and fathers are held hostage by their children, and parents are. You know, they want their kids to kind of just be as happy, as prosperous as all the other kids in the neighborhood. The only problem is your parents don't have any money. So your father, without really you knowing, goes to his boss and begs for like $10. And he takes that $10, goes to Walmart and buys you a third-hand or a second-hand bicycle. And he brings home this bike. And this bike was built in 1920s. And your friends have 2026 bicycles. And you said, Dad, this is far too embarrassing. I'm not going to ride this bike. I'm not even going to stand near it. It's embarrassing. And your father can tell you, listen, the only reason why, you know, I have this bike for you is because I just didn't have any money to buy you a better bike. And in the mind of like a 5-year-old, you just don't comprehend, you don't really understand the value of money, the value of a father being exploited by a system that doesn't really care for him or his life or his time, you know. And so it takes you a long, long time, you know. And then time passes, you become a parent, and then you realize you don't want your kids to go to public schools because Oakland public education just sucks. I mean, in the sense that, you know, parents work really hard to protect their kids, as you do as much as you possibly can to protect your mom. And once in a while, you have this woman going in and cleaning the house, right? And you want to make sure that this person who is a cleaner doesn't take anything or doesn't like harass your mom. So you sit there, you protect it. And that's what we do. You protect the things you care for, right? And you say, you know what? For the past like many years, I haven't sat to watch TV because I know that movies use foul language and I don't want my kids' ears to be exposed, you know, and I don't want to go to like various parts of society because again, I don't want them to be exposed to certain people or certain language or certain this, certain that. You know, every time I walk into the tower elevator, it smells like pot. You know, I said, you know, why can't be like a different aroma around this place? You know.
And that's the same thing that a family member meant when you said your nephew comes around you and she said, I don't want you to expose him.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's what she
Yeah.
said.
And then, you know, and there comes a point where you say, okay, maybe I should send my kids to like private school. Now, you don't really understand any of this stuff when you're not a parent, okay? And so you say, okay, you know what? I think I will send my kids to, say, some private school, let's say Head Royce. Okay. Then you look at the tuition. Are you kidding? Like first grade, $75,000 for like a 5-year-old? Who does that? So you're in a bind. Do you send them to public school? Do you send them to private school? Do you do a second or a third or a fourth mortgage on a house? Do you sell your underwear to make some extra income to send your kid to a private school? And you realize, well, how come no one really educated you on this stuff? And the truth is, you know, parents are so busy putting bread on the table that they don't really have the time or the patience. And even if they did, I think as a young kid, you just don't have, you know, the ears that can receive information the right way or advice or wisdom. And so it really is a lose-lose situation. And that's what I mean by a pamphlet or a manual where you sit and say, okay, if you want to like and I put this bench together, you follow steps 1 through 10. And step 11, you have a bench you can sit on. And you would hope that when you come out of your mom, these people sit you down and say, okay, this is how things are. And just in case you say no to your parents, the culture reinforces exactly what your parents told you. Then schools reinforce that. Right now what you have is your parents say one thing, the media says another, school says another. And then you go home saying, well, I don't need to listen to my dad because, Snoop Dogg says A, B, C, D. And I don't need to listen to Snoop Dogg because my teacher says E, F, G, H. And then you go home with a bundle of contradictory ideas and feelings. And of course, after a certain while, you just have no idea which path to take and you break down. Add to the fact that now you need 2 incomes. You really do, to pay rent, to pay mortgage, to put food on the table. Parents don't really have much time or patience to spend time with the kids. And, the formative years, 0 to about 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, they're just so important. Kids need to come home and know and feel that the parents are there to support them, to take care of them the best they can. Nobody's there. And so, there's just so many things to deal with. Consider, for example, what's happening in the Middle East right now.
Do you understand now?
The Middle East?
Do you understand now?
Parents?
Do you understand?
I gotta tell you, man.
Are you still angry like that? Because sometimes that builds character, humbleness to be like that.
It takes time for you to be able to call your parents without really telling them, but calling them, say, thank you for A, B, C, D, and mom says, thank me for what? Well, and the truth is, it's taken you like 60 years to realize, what it means to have left your country, your land, your people, your relatives, your parents to come here to take care of like 3, 4 crummy kids and watch them drop out of school, do all sorts of naughty things, end up in prison. Not really, but, and then wait, and wait and wait and wait until they blossom into something that you can be proud of to some extent. So parents have a tough job. Considering the midterm elections, considering the Epstein file, considering the Jewish lobbyists, considering the corruption of the Iranian government itself, considering how powerful human nature plays itself out in Donald Trump, you kind of sit back and say, wow, you're willing to destroy a country just to get reelected. It's such a few weeks ago, I went to the 7th floor because there's a budget cut, and we've had part-timers in our department, Philosophy and Humanities, for the past like 10 years. They can't teach now. There's no money. And people in power kind of distribute, how many classes each department should teach. Philosophy gets 5. Math gets 50. English gets 40. And you just say, I don't want like 10 extra classes. I just want 1 for each part-timer, which is only 2. And nobody budges. Nobody says, okay. And so you sit back and say, okay, there's a great story. Maybe I should just share that with you and then go home and bang my head against the wall. One of the great tricks of capitalism and consumerism And I'm not talking just about America, anywhere, at any time. Anyone with a good amount of power. The first thing that anyone will work on, Skyler, is your intellect. The moment they take away your powers to reflect, they will also take away your powers to observe. Once you can no longer reflect and observe, your eyes will look out, but you won't see anything. In other words, you will see someone being homeless. You will see. And you can even hear the cries of a homeless person. But now that your powers of observations have been taken from you, and you've been rendered blind and deaf and mute, the last thing that the system will take away from you is your heart, your ability to feel. Now when other people are in pain and they suffer, but you're not going to think too much about it, and you're not going to talk too much about it, and you're not going to feel too much about it. You know, it's like they tell Trump, you know, a couple of American military people died. And you know what he says? Look at the statues we have over there. How do you do that? You know? How do you know that you've had part-timers working here for the past like 10, 15, 20, 30, 40 years, and now, you know, you can just cut them loose? And I suppose the point is politics, and all of us have no choice but to be political. I mean, you gotta be political, man. I mean, you may not believe in lying, but if you're taking like 5 classes and you're taking care of your mom, you don't have time to sit and write a good essay. So you have AI write an essay for you. And then I say, this essay is gonna get a 0 because it's AI generated. Well, you're gonna come to my office and say, no, I did it myself. Well, of course you have to lie. You have no other options. Especially if you're dealing with an instructor who's turned to be an ass. If an instructor has some says, listen, I know the difficulties of life, go back home, just write a couple of good, you know, pages of whatever, and just submit that. I'll give you a C. I'll give you a passing grade. So make sure you protect your thinking and reflective abilities. Because if you do, then you can see, observe, take notes, hear, speak about the things that you think about and take notes on, and then you can feel. And then once you feel, you truly become a social animal. You can fight for the rights of other people as much as you possibly can. You know?
What's AI?
Artificial intelligence. Yeah. In Japan right now, the population is dropping because people are not having enough sex. And because they're not having enough sex, they're not having babies. And if you don't have babies, well, your race will eventually be eradicated. So what did...
AI for that?
Well, no, people are actually buying robots. They have a companion. And they even have ways for you to have sex with robots of sorts. And so what the government is doing now is they're going to small villages where technology has not infected those particular spaces. They're bringing young women from those villages, dropping them into the cities. And the nice thing about village people is that they want to talk, they want to be social, they want to mingle with other people, they want friends. And so even if you're addicted to your robot, you know, this young woman or young man comes and says, hey, what's going on? I say, oh, someone's talking to me. And then if you spend enough time with someone, attraction will grow. With attraction, there is attachment. With attachment, eventually, love or emotions need to kind of express themselves through physical means, i.e. sex. And then hopefully, you know, the man or the woman will get pregnant and the babies will pop out. So, yeah.
So AI is like a robot that can
Yeah.
have sex with a...
Right. Yeah.
Are you going to get one?
Not yet, but I mean, maybe when I'm 60 or 70. For what purpose? Cleaning the house or having sex?
said a robot can tell the robot to do something for you, so I figure you could tell it to do anything for you that you don't want to do.
That's true. Yeah, maybe. You know what? Maybe I'll get one from Amazon today. Isabel, anything? Puke? Brett? What kind of shampoo do you use? I mean, your hair, that's a problem with advertisements, you know? They pick someone like you. Naturally, your hair is the way it is, and, you know, they give you like this shampoo called Dove. And you come on TV, you look good, your hair looks good and smells good. And all these women are like combing through your hair with their beautiful fingers. And you say, if you were to use Dove, your hair would look just like mine. And being the pathetic, gullible man that I am, I'd go to like Costco, buy like a box of Dove shampoos. And my hair will never be like yours.
You actually you don't even do anything to it.
I don't brush it. I just get out of the shower.
That makes me angry. You know, I got to spend like 5 hours every morning. See, that's just, now that is injustice. It has nothing with Donald Trump. Biology, God, I don't know what it is. Milk, DNA. I'm not sure, you know, I should be mad at who exactly.
I got about like 5 years left. My dad's.
How's your mom?
My mom actually has.
How about your mom's dad?
Never had a.
Do you have you seen pictures of him?
Yeah.
Thin hair? Yeah, you'll be bald.
Bald is beautiful.
I'm just kidding, Baba. Bald is beautiful. I mean, what else can you say? Yeah. One of the nicest heads that you will ever see is the bald head of G.I. Gurdjieff. He has this mustache, forget, but you should, you know, print out his head and just pin it on your bedroom wall. G.I. Gurdjieff. I'm sorry, Rhett. Sorry about today's class. It's just, there was a movie some time ago with Michael Douglas. He was like the head of, I don't know, like this drug administration in the White House. It was a movie fighting, drug lords and all that. Then he comes to realize that his son is a drug addict. 20 years of serving the government, fighting the drug world, saying all these, flowery language, colorful language, how to combat drugs and how to combat addiction. And he comes to realize it's so difficult. Words mean nothing. And one day he's giving a briefing. He just says, I can't do it anymore. He steps down, resigns, and goes home and takes care of his kid. So, yeah, go ahead. More words, go ahead.
In the first essay assignment, we had to watch on code.
Yeah.
Brought up a point of choose love, here.
Right.
But I guess my question is, how do you balance hate when trying to instill kids instead of must?
Do you have children? So when you do have kids, what's going to happen is at a certain point, you have to send them to school. I mean, you could homeschool them, but eventually the government needs to know if you're homeschooling them or they're in school. So you send them to school. And one of the things about children is they are the most authentic, original existential thinkers and feelers and doers. In other words, they don't care if it's Jesus Christ or Socrates. If they don't like broccoli, they're just going to say no. And that's the main thing you need to understand about existentialism. That you have your innocence in there intact. You know what you want. You know what you like. You know what you don't like. and you refuse to be exploited, taken advantage of. If there is something out there you don't like, you just say no. There is no morality inside you. In other words, society has not yet played, with your interior to shape it, to form it, to put it in its own image, right? And so there comes a point where your kid, for the first 5-6 years, been playing soccer, having ice cream, watching TV, playing video games. He does what he does. Then you send him to school. School is still fun, but at a certain point, he's got to sit. He can't be disruptive. And then these days, every teacher now gives a student, what is it called, a fidget or a widget or something? They got to just play with something to keep them from being disruptive to themselves and the class. There comes a point where your son comes home with this thick folder. He's got to do math. Well, you're no longer you as a father, you're no longer 18. You've come to realize the difficulties of living in a studio with a wife and 2 kids. You realize the importance of money, not having enough. You realize the importance of education, which eventually will get you a good job, good money, hopefully a good house in a good neighborhood. And so all these things will come to you. And then you watch your kid floundering around, not going to school, not doing the homework. Now, you may think you have the patience of Job, and you will exercise it. You'll be gentle, you'll be soft-spoken, you'll be kind, you'll be forgiving, but there's a breaking point. And then your volume goes up. You may even grab your kid by the wrist and pull him towards the study table and push him down and grab his neck. Sit, read. Okay. Now, the nice thing about most of us is that your son is crying, he's at the same time doing his work. Okay? As you're walking around the house, vacuuming, doing your own stuff, you kind of feel guilty for what you subjected your son to. But you still understand the importance of studying. As he's doing his math, you go and you stand above him and you say, "Let me know when you're done so we can go get some frozen yogurt." Now, if you are very reflective, you're going to say to yourself, I live in a culture where kids throw their parents in the nursing home. I want to make sure my son doesn't do that to me. He'll do that to me if he doesn't care for me, if he hates me, and then I'll be tossed out. If on the other hand, I can create a relationship with him, he may still throw me in a nursing home, but he'll come visit me once a day. Okay. As a parent, you also have certain sentiments. You want to make sure he's not completely broken. And you want to make sure he doesn't hate you. Okay? So you play this game with him for a long time. Most parents are really, really, really good. Most parents are not abusive to the point where the kid just, they go on to hate their parent for the rest of their life. Someone what's his name, the American psychiatrist and psychologist, Abraham Maslow. I mean, he really, really hated his mom. He thought that his mom is the embodiment of evil. Okay? If you're asking what is the point where fear turns into hatred, I don't really know. All I know is that if the fear continues, and fear is a kind of abuse, if it continues over and over and over again, and it's an emotional thing, it's not an intellectual or reflective thing. If it's kind of like depression, it starts with an event, your messiah, the intellect comes down to figure out what the story is, how you can process it, explain it away, and then you realize, it leaves you kind of in despair, you're paralyzed, you don't really know how to work with it. And then little by little, the roots get deeper and deeper and deeper until you become chronically depressed. When an emotion, it's negative, irritation, frustration, agitation, it turns into dislike, and dislike turns into hatred, and then hatred will turn into vengeance. First, it's imaginative, you play with your head, in your head, you speak to yourself as you're going home, You say, Joanna, if I was to see you, I'd probably kick your ass. But when Joanna appears to you in person, you kind of give him a hug or a kiss or whatever, and life moves on. Okay? There comes a point where vengeance becomes physical. Rage. Rage turns into violence. And by the time it turns into violence, there's a good amount of hatred inside you. You know. So, do you know much about how Israel was created in the Middle East? You don't need to know. All I can tell you is the following. All that you need to know. If you're paying attention to what's happening in America right now, the white national movement is on the rise. The English language, the way we use language is beginning to change now, okay? In the past, maybe 5 to 6 years, if you paid attention to YouTube, ever since Trump got into office, people are much more courageous to come out and say to someone like me, you camel jockey, go back home, okay? For the past maybe 50 years in this country, such language, not used very often, maybe in the privacy of your own home, but in a social setting, you'd have a good amount of self-respect because society at large would demonize such behavior. Now, Karens and Kens are on the rise. It's actually, you should be very proud to go out there and say, you know, camel jockey, go back home. Mexican, you go back home. Cambodian, you go. I mean, these are things to be proud of these days. Okay? Now, what the movement is basically saying, which has its origin in the interpretation, is a very weird interpretation of Genesis. That Adam is not a brown man, it's not a black man, it's not a red man. Adam is a white man, and Eve is a white man. So when God creates Adam and Eve, God only creates white Adam and Eve and white Adam and Eve. So anything other than white, God did not create. And then we have social Darwinism and the rest of it. If you have paid attention, one of the reasons as to why we are so gung-ho right now, this particular government, in deporting a lot of immigrants, few things. There is this hidden agenda that the white race is slowly disappearing and we need to bring it back. Second, prison beds are now privatized. In other words, every bed out there that remains vacant, companies are losing money. Okay. Also, we give money to countries where we are able to build prisons and then hold deportees in them. So everything is about politics. Okay. Now, if you're wondering why all of a sudden in the Middle East there is this hatred, this anger towards a group of people being pushed into the Middle East and Palestinians are slowly being pushed out, it's simply because of all the Western political movements since 1911 or 1901. Redrawing the map, the Balfour Declaration, Roosevelt dying, Truman getting into power, his re-election bid, lobbyists pressuring UK. I mean, there's so much stuff going on, you know, and all of a sudden, this law that allowed only 15,000 non-Arabs, i.e. Jews, to move into Palestine, all of a sudden gets to be 100,000. Do you know what the US is doing right now? Mexicans can't come in, Persians can't come in. It doesn't matter where you're from, you just can't come into the US unless you come here legally. And do you know how long the legal wait is for someone to allow you to come to the US? It's about 5 to 10 years, sometimes 15 years. Who can wait this long? No one. People come here for hopes and dreams, you know, because their country no longer has any hopes and dreams left to give them. Right? So the point I'm trying to make is the following. If you allow 10,000 people to move to a location, you can, hi Abi, how are you? Good, thank you. They can tolerate that. But all of a sudden, 100,000 and then 200,000. And initially the Jews, you know, occupy 1/10 of the Palestinian space. And within a few years, they become 1/3 of the Palestinian state. And so the point I'm trying to make is certain things need to happen where it's no longer just about you being irritated. You're just angry now. You know, you and I can be angry with one another, but I can come to your office, you can come to my office, I can take you and get you a cup of coffee, we can sit and have a dialogue. When anger gets into hate, morphs into hatred, the emotions are so intense that it's really, really difficult to overcome. Add to the fact that hate has a certain component in its history that anger doesn't have. Hate demands vengeance. Anger demands dialogue. I mean, for those of us in this class who've ever been in relationships, sometimes you become angry at your companion. But then time passes, you forget. You sit, you have a conversation, everything is resolved. Hate, you file for divorce. No compromise. You know, and all this talk about morality, I think it's just there for us, for people with power. They're guided by their own conscience or desires or intentions. You know, I think Mark Zuckerberg has children, does he? I wonder if he has given access to the internet to his kids to watch porn. I doubt very much he does that. But he makes it possible for the rest of us parents to give access to pornography on YouTube or Facebook or whatever when they're only like 2 days old. You know. I think maybe Nietzsche is right. Morality is there to keep the sheep. You know, to feel guilty about things you ought not feel guilty about. I don't know. Yeah. No. I'm just kidding.
Will humanity ever free itself from the cycle of, I suppose, a revolution, liberation, and then the installation of another dictator? Connecting it back to my question from last semester when I asked about heroes, do you think that the reason why these people rise to power in the first place is because we need heroes? I mean, with Elon Musk was like, before he went completely insane, people were like, he was like, I mean, he still is, it's unfortunate, but he was very popular in the tech space and the engineering space. People were saying how he was like a really good person, an amazing person, and now it's like this. And it was the same thing for Mark Zuckerberg, same thing for Sam Altman, same thing for Jeff Bezos. I mean, how do these people get there in the first place? And
Do you know the history of Costco? It started in someone's garage. Then it became like a 7-Eleven. Then it became a Safeway. Then it became a Walmart. Then it became a Costco. A few years ago, there was an experiment. 4 elephants. You probably have heard the story. 4 elephants were given buckets of water each. And one of the elephants had the same water. The only difference was that it was orange color. They were all thirsty. And despite having water, the 3 elephants with clear water stopped drinking from their buckets. They just stood still, watching this elephant drinking this orange liquid. Aren't you attracted to someone who speaks well, Leah? Aren't you attracted to someone who goes to Yale? Aren't you attracted to someone who has a big house, a big car? Aren't you attracted to the ideas expressed about Plato, about Machiavelli? There is something about us that enjoys people who are slightly different or unique. They have talents that you and I don't. They're very much like the elephants. And doesn't your body language change when you're in the presence of an elephant with an orange tub? Of course, everything about you changes. You're a bit more respectful, you're a bit more soft-spoken, you want to be accepted, you do all sorts of things. You change yourself, you know. And you have someone like Elon Musk, you know, or someone like Donald Trump with tons of money and power. I mean, do you know what it means to be a superpower? You hold all the cards. You change yourself to be wanted, to be needed by this other person. That's what you do. The only problem is, for those of you who may not know, we'll be offering 2 classes this summer. One is this one, online. The other is World Religions. If you're still here, Leah, you should sign up for the class. Humanity is 40, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, from 6 to 8:45 in this very room. 3 units. I'll just give you an A. How's that? You know why we talk about Gilgamesh after maybe 5, 6, 7, 10,000 years of time having been passed? We don't talk about Gilgamesh because he was drunk with power. He had power because of his great looks. He had power because he had the strength of the gods. He was as beautiful as the gods, the strength of the gods. You know why we talk about Gilgamesh? Because while he was drunk with power, the scales were imbalanced. One was here, one was there. Then something very strange happened to him. He encountered a man named Enkidu. Enkidu lived in the forest. He's like the Malcolm X of the ancient world. He's like the Jesus Christ of the ancient world. What Enkidu did for him was made him realize that, very much like what Jesus says, that human beings do not live by bread alone. There is physical bread, there is emotional bread, there is intellectual bread, and there is spiritual bread. What Enkidu, what Gilgamesh was not exposed to was the right emotional and spiritual intellectual bread. All that Enkidu or Gilgamesh was fond of was, I want to push people around, I want to be cruel to them, I want to like sleep with every attractive young woman out there, married, unmarried, or about to be married, doesn't really matter. And then he lost what it means to be human. That's what happens with power. There comes a point where people no longer enjoy those behaviors from Gilgamesh. So you know what they do? They go to the gods and say, remind him what it means to be human. Enkidu walks in. When Enkidu and Gilgamesh meet, for the next like 10, 15, 20 pages, Gilgamesh slowly remembers what it means to be a human being, to fall in love, to have friendships, to be able to sacrifice yourself for another human being. Initially, power is just about you. It's very self-serving. If I was to give you a very personal example, I would say the following. When I used to teach a lot of in-person classes, I would come here at, again, 4 o'clock in the morning, start my class at 9, 9 to 12, 1 all the way to 10. I was here all the time, and I was in the presence of all these ideas every single day for about maybe 30 years. Then when online classes came about, you know, online classes are relatively new, I spend less time in the classroom and more online. So, well, this is fun. Maybe I can take, you know, teach like 5, 10, or 15, or 20 online classes, and I did. At a certain point, I said, you know what? I don't need to teach all these classes, and I don't need to make all this money. I don't really care for it. There are all these other people, and I was once a part-timer. I know how difficult it is to get a job. Why don't I bring these people in and give them classes? And so it took me about 20 years to get to that place. To say, you know, I'm so tired of being drunk off of this power. I want to like share the wealth a little bit. So in the past like 10, 15, 20 years now, most of the part-timers they've had, with the exception of one, they've all been Laney students. All of them. You know? And so, and in as much as they gave me a lot of respect, they don't even call me now. And that's the point I'm trying to make. I think if you're talking about a benevolent dictator, someone who sees something about you, slaps you for the first 10 years until you get your PhD. Once you have your PhD, I don't need to be around you anymore. You know, your life is set, you can go out there and do your stuff. When a dictator has so many diminished human qualities in them, they're just evil. They don't do anything for the well-being of other people. But nevertheless, I think all of us, long answer or short answer to your very complex question is, we're attracted to power. I will talk a little bit about women and their bodies and the power that holds, but I'm not really in the mood. It's a long tradition. Yeah, just.
I understand how that's like a big subject, because I was thinking about that. You know, the power to create life is the ultimate power. And we talk about how power corrupts, but women are sort of different. You know, are men more corruptible than women? This is something we have been thinking about, because we seem to be more susceptible to corruption. But I heard a phrase that I really liked. You know, I'm a gardener, I like to grow plants, and they said, be a gardener means you believe in the future. You know? And it seems to like relate to having children also. It's similar, like, you know, to have children means you believe in the future, or, you know, first, maybe not for everybody, but what do you think about that? You know?
I believe in my kids' future. It's just going to be very dark and gloomy. I mean, I think temperamentally, I think our perspective is a little different. I garden not because I like to see things blossom and bloom. I garden because I hate people. I just want some quiet time. I want my hands to get dirty. I want, you know, just to be left alone with things that can hurt me. And it's a way to kind of shut off my brain. When I buy any trees from Costco to plant, and I know it's going to take 10 years for an apple to come or an orange to come about, so, well, shit, I'm not going to be around. It's probably for my kids. And by the time my kids begin to appreciate what has been planted, they'll probably be like 70 or 80. So fuck them, I'm not going to plant anything. Forgive the language. It's all Skylar's fault. And even this class, I've seen the movie Terminator, the first one and the second one. So for those of you who've seen the first one, you know, you have a mother who's very optimistic, very positive, until she encounters the world of the machines. And she comes to know that the machines are there to dominate the human race. So, and knowing that, you know, she has a Jesus Christ as a son, that he's going to lead, you know, the human race out of this bondage. So she kind of just pushes her son away from her. And she has access to certain realities that perhaps other kids don't have, other parents don't have. She knows that the machines are there to destroy human beings. But it's not something that her son sees, it's not something that other people see, but only that, you know, she sees. I think as a parent, you mostly have access to the dark side of life. That's why you try to protect them. And you should have mostly access to the dark side, because the positives, you don't really much care. You know that they're in good hands. It's the dark stuff that you need to be worried about. And they're everywhere now, especially because of the internet. But all of the sides. Skylar, anything? Yeah, it's too long. What? Oh, okay. Eva? Myrna? Cynthia? Abby? Isabel? Leah?
Well, I suppose going back to Jesse's question when he asked about men being more corruptible and women creating life, I suppose, is that why men are the ones dominating the artificial intelligence movement? Because it gives them this semblance of creating life or creating something, and how do they do that?
And maybe, I don't know. All I can tell you is that my wife gets up at 4 to take care of the kids. I will never do that. My wife will spend hours in the kitchen trying to make them lunch and dinner and breakfast. You know, I throw food at them. And I say, well, do what, they say, what do you want? I don't know what to do with this. And maybe it's biological in the sense that men had to go out there and kill and destroy and bring home whatever. Women had to stay home, you know. A woman's space was not as aggressive and as violent as men's were. And maybe over the past like million years, something has happened to men's wiring as opposed to the women's. I don't really know. It's up for debate. Sarah? Abia?
About the idea of
Humane uncertainty? Oh, human uncertainty. I have a friend. Her parents didn't get along too well for the past like 50 years. The mother died eventually, the father's still around. Then she got married, but that didn't work out too well for her, so she divorced with 2 kids. Then she got together with another man, had 2 kids with him, but that didn't work out too well, so she left him. And then it sucks to be alone in life, you know. And so she got together with another man. She's still with him. And it's been about a year and a half, 2 years maybe. And once in a while when we run into one another, I ask her, are you going to marry? She says, probably not. You know, I think if you live in an environment, whether it's a psychological environment or physical environment, where you're always pushed into this dark black hole where you have no idea what's waiting for you. The truth is, most of the way you think about life is going to revolve around uncertainties. And the problem with that is human beings are creatures that desire stability all the time. They want to be comforted. You know, I want to know that when I go home, there is my mom, there is my dad, there is my brother, there is my sister, the TV works, you know, that the lights can be turned on. Any time that these certainties are taken away from me, I lose a little bit less. In the 1980s or 80s, yeah, when the earthquake in the Bay Area happened, the truth is for the next few days, people were very uncertain if they can walk on the ground and be certain that the ground is going to hold their weight. We all thought that there's just going to be a hole all of a sudden opening up and swallowing you. And so everything we've done for the past many, many thousands and millions of years is for one thing, to predict our future. You know, you want to go skiing, for example. You know, you go home and you say, Alexa, what's the forecast for the next month and a half? And I'll tell you exactly how every day is going to unfold. You know, you have a schedule with your husband, you sit and say, Seth, so what are you doing for the next week? Next weekend, for example, you're going A, B, C, D. If on the other hand, you know, you ask your companion, what are you doing? I don't really know. What are you eating? I don't really know. You realize life becomes very chaotic because that's not the way we function. We like rules. You know, we like to know to some extent how our future is going to unfold. One of the devastating aspects of knowing too much of how the future is going to unfold, one of the problems with, for example, what's happening today in the Middle East is the following. The West has never had a clean hand when it's involved in the Middle East. You know, it's always been self-serving, always. It has always been devastating for India, for Pakistan, for Afghanistan, for Iraq, for Libya, for Syria, for Iran, right? And so whenever the West rises up and says, we want to go there and fix, because of the past century and all the awful things that the West has done, the truth is you're always going to approach this, you know, in a very doubtful way. That's not going to be true. That's not true. It's never going to happen. You know, the very fact that people actually sit and watch 2 hours of State of the Union by any president at any stage in American history, in my mind, it's just laughable. At what stage do you get to trust anything that comes out of the mouth of any politician? It makes no sense. You spend billions of dollars destroying other cultures, save the homeless in your country, give them free medical, you know, remove poverty, homelessness, make education free like Europe. You know, so uncertainty is not something that we deal with unless you happen to be like this philosopher sitting in a cave, you know, and you have enough emotional, spiritual, intellectual power where you can say, be self-sustained. You're not going to be swayed by any book, by any person out there saying anything colorful, because you've understood a few things. You know, it's great knowing that marriage these days, if there are 100 people in this room, and if the current divorce rate is 70%, it means 70 people in this class will eventually divorce. And so when you walk into a marriage, you say to yourself, you know, man, am I going to be one of those 1 out of 70%? Or am I going to be the 30% who's going to survive? That depends on how much access you have to reality, how optimistic you are, what your resources are, where you live, your temperament, your money situation, the kids you got, if you and your husband have similar cultures. There's so many things that need to come together these days for anything to work well. You know, I mean, you marry someone who's black, you marry someone who's brown or yellow or white, and they come from a completely different culture. Even two people from the same culture believe in different narratives. That wasn't the case for us. You know, one of the nice things about the African American community is that their history is still very much alive. It's the single most important point where they can meet. They know who the villain is. They know what history has done to them, you know, and that's their shared common narrative. Once that gets destroyed, I'm not quite sure what you can stand on anymore. You know, right now in my country, you have a group of people in favor of this particular person, another group in favor of that particular person, another group in favor of this, another. What, a house divided unto itself? How can it last? It won't. So you and I will do whatever we possibly can to quash any uncertainty about any aspect of life. If you need a passing grade, but right now you're under this false illusion that you're going to pass the class, even though you haven't submitted work, even though you don't come to class very often, and if you do, you don't really pay attention. You're not very visible, but you have this ridiculous assumption you're going to pass, right? And then a week before the class semester ends, you're going to look at the scoreboard, and you're going to say, man, I'm failing. That's uncertainty about your future. What are you going to do with that? You're going to come to my office, maybe with a gift, and you're going to say, Amir, you know, my dog died, my husband died, my wife died, everyone in my family died. That's why I couldn't do any work. Is there a way I can pass? And what you're basically doing is trying to generate feelings about inside me, empathy. I can look at it and say, well, yeah, poor chap, maybe I should give him or her another chance, you know. And so once I'm duped into buying a narrative, you walk away from my office being certain you're going to pass the class. I don't know if there's a God, Abi. I don't know if I have a soul. I don't know if I die, if I'm going to end up in paradise or hell, if there's a God. I don't know any of those things. But the idea of working so hard for 70 years and then dying, and then being completely forgotten, as if my life meant nothing and I made no significant dent, you know, while I was alive, that's a horrifying thing to think about. My wife will remarry, my kids will forget me after all this work. So you know what I do? Pathetic. I pray. You know, I talk about death to my kids with my kids. I have this ridiculous, stupid YouTube channel that one of my students created for me. It's my pathetic ways of remaining relevant when no longer here. You know, so none of us will do well with uncertainty unless you have really come to realize how uncertain all of life is, and that's devastating. And then you've come to a place where you accept that. You know, it's like you've come to realize that you have a 6-month-old baby, your husband is a drunk, but he's rich, and you got no power in life. You have no idea what's waiting for you when you go home. All you know is that you want to protect your baby. And you will do whatever you can. That's the best we can do. It's all a facade. It's all a show. Hello, Mirna. How are you doing? Where are you from again? How long have you been here? 24 years. Yeah, it's good. Well, this has been a waste of time. It's good to see all of you. Stay safe. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Take care, Fiuk. Yeah, yeah. Thank you. It's good to see you, Skyler.
Need to see you next Monday.